The time to build is upon us.
وهنا علينا أن نكسر القوالب التي تشكل عليها النساء والفتيات منذ ولادتهن.
We are prepared to build it up and make it a nation that will be respected by every other nation in the world.
Combattants de l'indépendance, aujourd'hui victorieux.
We are called to assist the earth to heal her wounds, and in the process, heal our own.
I'm Abdel-illah Boukhezer, founder and president of the MEA Institute for Strategic Studies. In this episode, we turn our attention to Syria, a country emerging from over a decade of civil war, now facing the monumental task of reconstruction. With the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December 2024, a new chapter has begun. But what does rebuilding look like when the blueprint is unclear, the leadership untested, and the ghost of neighboring Lebanon's stumped reconstruction loom large? Joining us today is Abdul Fattah El Cheikh, head of the MENA desk at the MEA Institute, to unpack the challenges, opportunities, and historical parallels with what will define Syria's post-war future. Abdul Fattah, welcome.
Happy to be with you here today, Abdullah.
So, Abdul Fattah, what does Syria's reconstruction look like today, 6 months after the fall of Bashar al-Assad?
I mean, it is certainly very difficult to gauge the current situation on the ground in Syria. As you previously indicated, it's just been 6 months since the fall of the Assad regime, the deposition of Bashar al-Assad, who was the son of Hafez al-Assad, former president of Syria, who established the regime. So 6 months after the fall of a regime that lasted for over 50 years, it's certainly difficult to gauge the situation on the ground. But at the very least, we can see that there are some green shoots that are emerging. The overall mood in the street, namely in Damascus and Aleppo, is certainly positive. A lot of people who work in business, a lot of people who own shops, and to be clear, historically, Syria has always been an SME economy. Perhaps if you ask people in the street what an SME is, they might not agree with you on the analysis, but from a more of a microeconomic perspective, Syria has historically been an SME country. So a lot of SME owners, especially in Damascus and the old city, are very optimistic. You can see, as I previously said, green shoots of optimism. The situation with the country's overall finances is stabilizing. It is not all the way there, but it is stabilizing, especially with the recent lifting of the sanctions. We are starting to see more capital inflows into the country, albeit these are not substantive. There are certain improvements when it comes to the infrastructure. For example, the international airport in Damascus and the regional airport in Aleppo have been fully functioning, with the exception of yesterday, given the current situation in the region, have been fully functioning since February of this year. There has been, certainly you can see it, for example, if you're traveling from Lebanon to Damascus or from from Amman to Syria via northern Jordan, you can certainly see that there's more traffic, there's more people, there's more exchange of goods and services. So overall, again, I want to reiterate this idea. The situation is leaning positive in order to use political lingo, but then again, the sample is too small to fully evaluate. But if you want to ask for my personal opinion, it's looking good. But this is, again, there's no consensus about this. And I think that we need a wider sample in order for us to decide this. But overall, there's optimism, which is certainly positive. We saw during the war that citizens of Syria were very pessimistic. The mood was very gloomy. People didn't see an outlet for the improvement and the betterment of their lives. So right now, there's a lot of optimism, which is certainly a step forward.
Amazing. If we can delve deeper into the details of the reconstruction of Syria today, who are the key players, both domestic and international, shaping the reconstruction agenda of Syria?
Certainly. The current government of Syria that is managing the transition is certainly a key actor. They have a critical responsibility in not only reshaping the government bureaucracy and hiring for competencies, but also looking at the structure of the government, which was under the Assad regime extremely outdated, extremely bloated, extremely lacking in competencies. So the current transitioning government is certainly a critical actor on all fronts, and we will certainly develop on that in a bit. But then again, you need to take into account the role that regional actors play, be it in terms of them giving the green light to their companies to go into Syria and to start reconstruction work. This applies namely to Turkey, which has certainly an outsized influence in Syria nowadays, and its companies are actively jockeying in order to present themselves as the most opportune actor, shall we say, to take on heavy reconstruction projects and heavy rehabilitation projects. There's no escaping the fact, of course, that other regional heavyweights, namely the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and also the state of Qatar, are also key actors, namely because they have a vested interest in the reconstruction in Syria for a variety of reasons. From purely business perspective, of course, their companies are also heavyweights, and they would be very interested in business opportunities in a country with a pre-war population of 24 million. But also, on the other hand, the GCC countries want a stable region. They have been actively working towards that, and that, of course, a stable region would include a stable, robust, active, vibrant Syria. Of course, other regional players, perhaps not as much heavyweights as, for example, Turkey or GCC countries, but that are right next to Iraq, so close neighbors that have a vested interest in a stable and prosperous Syria, namely Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, also have a role, albeit their role is still emerging. We still do not fully understand how these countries or the private sector in these countries will actively partake and participate in the reconstruction of Syria. So that is an overview. Of course, I mean, there's no escaping the fact also that major international powers, namely the United States of America and the EU, when it comes to Western countries, also have a vested interest in the reconstruction, albeit right now we don't see too many signs on the ground of how their role is going to shape up to be. We know, for example, that the EU lifted sanctions. Same applies to the United States, which is in the process of lifting sanctions. As we previously discussed, this is going to help capital inflows into the country, but we still do not fully understand how these countries are going to partake in the reconstruction, be it in the short term, where focus is usually by the EU and the United States, is initially on humanitarian services and stabilization efforts, and later on when it comes to wide-scale reconstruction. And perhaps just as a bit of a tangent, there's no escaping the fact that China is a major global actor. It is the world's second largest economy. Chinese companies are extremely competent and very vibrant and key participants in the economies of the wider region of East Asia, Southeast Asia. And so as a result, I would throw China into the mix there, albeit so far we don't have any signals, not from the government of China and not from any major private Chinese companies on when it comes to their interest or their role in reconstruction in Syria. But I would certainly keep an eye on China.
Absolutely. When we talk about reconstruction, we talk about capital. So how do investors are responding to the current political volatility in the region? Is there any signs? Is there any FDI inflow coming into Syria right now? We've seen major shifts in regards to sanctions. So the EU had lifted sanctions. The US is in the process of lifting sanctions. But also, you have different, as you said, investors from the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, major investors in Syrian infrastructure, and also Turkey. How is what are the interplay behind it, and how markets are responding to it?
I mean, when it comes to markets, I think that it's really important initially just to emphasize that the market is there and it is working its way out of the doldrums of war. So in the last week of May, actually, the Syrian Stock Exchange opened for the first time since 2021, which is a major development. Now, when it comes to capital inflows, this is to a degree still hard to measure and hard to evaluate and hard to gauge. Because, I mean, as you previously said, there's a lot of private sector actors and governments that want to invest in Syria. They want to have a robust presence in Syria. But then again, they're doing it in a bit of a one step forward, two step backwards sort of manner, because, again, they're evaluating the situation, especially the hard to measure and somewhat strenuous security situation outside of Greater Damascus. But going back to the main topic, again, it's very difficult to evaluate intent. But what we can say is that, for example, during the first week of May, Dubai Port Authorities, which is a major operator of freight ports around the world, signed an $800 million agreement with the current government in Syria to reoperate and rehabilitate the seaport of Tartus. Tartus being one of the two major Syrian cities along the Mediterranean coast. It is the southernmost city along the Mediterranean coast, the northernmost one being Latakia. But it is a major port that historically has been a bit undermined by the port of Latakia. So this is certainly a major development. We don't have a full-on evaluation. I know that there's a lot of think tanks working on this evaluation. We can't fully say how many jobs this is going to create, but we certainly can say that an activation of the second port along the Syrian coast is going to allow Syria to gear its economy more towards competitive exports. It's going to create jobs. This is certainly going to entail also investment in infrastructure. So this is certainly a positive development, and I would say that this is the most salient commitment in terms of reconstruction and FDI in Syria, over the current year, over 2025.
I think the main follow-up here question is, how the future of Syria looks like comparing to other neighboring countries. So how does the end of Syria's civil war compare to Lebanon's in the 1990s? And what does it mean for reconstruction? Especially Lebanon had the Daif Accords, legal political framework to end the civil war in Lebanon. Syria didn't have that. So how do you see it going forward? Can we see a transitioning phase? What can we expect next?
I mean, the transition, the current situation in Syria and the post-bellum transition in Syria is certainly very interesting when compared to what happened in Lebanon in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. I think it is critical for us to underline and emphasize the fact that Lebanon and Syria are not carbon copies. Syria is not Lebanon, Lebanon is not Syria, it goes without saying. But that there are certainly, because of historical ties, because of cultural ties, because of linguistic ties, because of just the fact that they share a very wide border, that Syria is Lebanon's only land-based access point to the world, given the situation along the southern border. So if you take that into account, you can certainly see a lot of parallels between the end of the civil war in Lebanon in the 1990s and the current situation in Syria. And I can certainly tell you that the comparison does not paint Lebanon in the best of lights. But as you said, for example, in Lebanon, the civil war, a 15-year conflict which started in 1975 and ended in 1990, was underpinned by a legal text, by an accord, that is the Ta'if Accord, which was sponsored and endorsed by a number of major Arab powers, including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Algeria. So while Lebanon had that, and adjusting to the variable of what Lebanon did with that, so while Lebanon had that, for example, we do not see a legal text or an accord underpinning the current situation in Syria. So this is a bit of a microcosm of what happened in Lebanon. And certainly, given the situation in Syria, Syrian authorities and Syrian citizens, and also major actors that want to support Syria and that are invested in a stable and vibrant Syria, as we previously discussed, Turkey, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the Arab League, the European Union, the United States, these actors should be aware of the limitations of reconstruction in Lebanon, and they should actively work with the government, but also with civil society groups, with academics, with intellectuals, in order to steer the country away from a reconstruction which benefits namely the business class and the rich, and which impoverishes the middle class. And I would say, albeit this is pure conjecture, would orient the country to a financial crunch and a fiscal crisis, much like what happened in Lebanon in 2019.
Absolutely. I think we can talk about the, I would say, the regional interests on that regards of Syria and Syrians. I think it's really on the strategic interests of Syria to move forward and really kind of push internal unity first, and then strengthen regional cooperation with Arab countries. I think we have major issues that are on the table. Water security is one of them, food security as well, but also energy security, you know, which could seem a bit odd in regards to the wealth of Syria. But I think the way actually you operate these electric centrals in Syria and different Arab countries in the region is different. So you have foreign and external operators providing these resources. So I think really kind of understanding where we're going in the future, and especially we'll be seeing a new transitioning phase, but most especially I think it will be interesting to look at how, you know, what would be the trigger of these negotiations. So what would be kind of the bargaining behind it?
I would certainly think that, so I want to box the actors in the answer into two wide groups, and they certainly have an interface and they have every prerogative to develop an interface. And so one of these groups are the governments of the countries in the region, and the other is, as you rightfully indicated, civil society organizations and activists and nonprofit organizations. When it comes to the former, I truly believe that the pressure is simply an external pressure. I believe that all governments across the region are fully aware that there are a lot of, by external, I don't necessarily mean political, but they understand that there are external pressures and that these are variables that are not within their control that they need to deal with and address. I mean, the pressure on resources, especially when it comes to water resources, is namely the result of climate change. The region has, starting in the 1990s, seen decreasing precipitation, which of course increases the risk of desertification, but also crop failure. And of course, agriculture is critical in the region, especially because of the importance placed on wheat, which is the staple crop of the region, has been for over 6,000 years. So of course, there's a lot of pressure when it comes to, again, external elements, namely climate change. The energy transition is critical. You're talking about countries adjusting for the variable of the war in Syria. You're talking about countries where the fertility rate is still fairly robust, especially if we compare it to other countries in the world. And so as a result, this is a growing population that would need resources and that would need food and energy in order to sustain its growth. So I think I'm fully aware that the governments in the region are aware of these challenges. It's just that the issue is at times understanding how to tackle these challenges, understanding how to develop policies that would address these challenges. And of course, if the challenge crosses the border, how do you work with regional partners and with neighboring countries in order to address these challenges? And this is where I truly believe that civil society organizations, technical experts, and activists come into play. They can serve both as the main driver of when it comes to evaluating a challenge and proposing technical solutions and policies that allow for addressing the challenge. And they can also allow the government to better understand the challenge from the people's perspective, so that any solution they come up with is equitable and doesn't lead to any adverse side effects or any collateral damage. So basically, it is up to civil society and to civil society organizations to actively work with the government in order to implement policies that do no harm. And once the government steps in, this is where businesses come into play. This is where the private sector can also be brought into the table to bring forward its financing of the solutions, but also its technical expertise in order to resolve the solution. If you look at it from the perspective, for example, of water resources, uh, eastern Lebanon, so the Bekaa Valley is very rich in water. It is a high plateau at almost 1,000 meters high, so almost 3,000 feet high. That is flanked on both sides by fairly substantially large mountain chains. You have to the west Mount Lebanon, the historical Mount Lebanon, and to the east the anti-Lebanon mountain chain, also known in Syria as the Qalamu mountain chain. And so in winter, when these mountains fill up with snow, and then when the snow melts, the Bekaa Valley acts as a reservoir. And so as a result, you have two major rivers by any standard that emerge from the Bekaa Valley. One of them being the Litani, which runs exclusively in Lebanon, the other being Al-Asi, the Orontes River, which runs from Lebanon through Syria, through just 10 kilometers outside of Homs, then through the heart of the old city of Hama, and then it goes into Turkey and it empties out in the Mediterranean in Antioch. But if you look at this historically, neither Lebanon nor Syria have fully exploited the river. Lebanon doesn't have a single dam on the river, and Syria also, with the exception of the historical Noiras in Hama, really also doesn't exploit the river. So if you look at it, just the situation surrounding the Al-Asi River, the Orontes River, is a major outlet, is a prospective major outlet cooperation between Lebanon and Syria, where constructions of, say, dams in Lebanon would actually be beneficial to Syria, because in the case where you have more precipitation than expected, or there's a risk of floods, you can control the flood from Lebanon rather than building dams and dikes in Syria and needing to control the crisis when it gets there. That's an example. On the other hand, the flow of the river is actually stronger in Lebanon because the inclination is more steep in Lebanon. And so as a result, building hydroelectric power stations in Lebanon would be more efficient when it comes to extracting power from the river. And so producing energy in Lebanon could allow for this energy to be dispensed not just in Lebanon, but also for it to be dispensed through the grid in Syria. So this is an example of how the countries can cooperate when it comes to resources. Also, this, of course, applies to a number of tributaries of the Jordan River in southern Syria and southern Lebanon, albeit, of course, you have a fairly difficult situation to negotiate around that with Israel laying claims also to the water of these tributaries and to the Jordan River. But also, in addition to that, going back to generating power and electricity, in a study from 2007, the World Bank actually placed Syria second in the region in terms of its potential to produce energy from photovoltaic cells, so from solar energy. It's only outpaced by Turkey, and this is namely because of the massive geographic size of Turkey in comparison to Syria. So again, if you look at it this way, this could provide an incentive to countries like Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq to invest in building these solar farms in Syria, where the potential is high and where electricity productions could be very high, and then connecting their own grids to these production facilities that would provide everyone with clean, sustainable energy to feed their energy needs and their growing populations and their economies, which are in the process of recovery. So certainly there's a lot of outlets to cooperate between these countries. The three main actors on the table should be, of course, it goes without saying, the government of these respective countries, civil society organizations, activists, and technical experts, and last but certainly not least, the private sector, which should be actively incentivized to invest in improving ties and in cross-border projects and operations.
Do we have a grand strategy on that regard? Do we have a grand strategy in the region? And I think something that is very much important is to start building that strategy, that grand strategy from the bottom up. I think it's a grassroots initiative. How we can build it is, well, through youth investments. Youth are a major actor in the region. There's an important share of it. If we compare Middle East and Africa, 65% of the population is under 30 in the region. I think that's a number to really underline. But really, is there a grand strategy in the region? Do they kind of see where they're going or where they want to be in the next 30, 40, 50 years?
At the moment, I think it is pretty safe to say that it is very difficult to see or to detect or to triangulate on what you call the grand strategy. The governments in the region are dealing with their own massive challenges, which would see them, and this is by no means absolving anyone from responsibility, but which does see them put regional cooperation and long-term investment on the back burner, regrettably. As you know, we've discussed this extensively today. The current government of Syria is dealing with a transition. It is managing a fraud security situation in the country. It is actively attempting to present itself as a trustworthy and credible government that is representative of the Syrian people, which means that regional cooperation hasn't been very salient on its radar. Case in point, I mean, there has been a number of border clashes between armed personnel in Lebanon and groups affiliated with the current security groups affiliated with the current government of Syria. And yet there has been no diplomatic exchanges between Lebanon and Syria after the new Syrian government emerged from the war in December of last year. In Lebanon also, after the last very devastating Israeli war in the country, the current government is dealing both with internal pressures pertaining to reconstruction, pertaining to people who are still displaced from their homes after the war, but also with external pressures pertaining to the domestic situation in Lebanon and Hezbollah's armaments. If you look at it also from Jordan's perspective, Jordan has been dealing with an economic crunch, with an economic slowdown that was exacerbated during COVID, and Jordan's actually one of the countries that hasn't been endowed or isn't included in the countries that have actually benefited from the post-COVID recovery. And I mean, Iraq is a bit outside of the scope of analysis, but you know, as we all know, Iraq needs to deal with issues pertaining with the distribution of national wealth, with a very frustrated youth, with youth unemployment, among other things. So if you look at it, and it makes sense for these governments to prioritize getting their house in order, doing some housekeeping before they set their eyes on regional cooperation. However, that does not negate the fact that each and every country in the region has a lot to gain from regional cooperation, that the countries of these region are certainly, if they work together, they're certainly more than the sum of their parts. There's certainly a lot of synergy points in the region. And so as a result, again, emphasizing the point, while it is critical for the governments of these regions to focus on their own problems, it would be a massive error to put regional cooperation on the back burner and to not allocate more resources and more time and more investment to regional cooperation.
Absolutely. I mean, on that regard, maybe it would be a follow-up question. But going back to the reconstruction process, so what could be the mechanism, to ensure transparency, accountability, and citizen participation in the rebuilding of the new Syria?
This could sound a bit overly simplistic, but I'm a full-throated believer in publishing public accounts online and allowing people to look into these public accounts, to review them, to inquire about them, and even if needed, to file lawsuits if they find that there's anything, if they find that there's any information that is missing, or that if they find that there's anything that is discrepant. Because I mean, on one hand, the government's resources are the people's resources. The government isn't, I don't know, mining for resources in the asteroid belt. It's the main drive of public finances is taxation. And one of the main objectives of taxation is to better distribute national wealth, and in order to ensure that people do not become overly rich to the point where it puts strain on social ties, but also that people who are vulnerable are being taken care of. So if you look at it this way, the publication of public accounts is certainly critical. It increases the credibility of a given government or a given public structure of governance, like, for example, a municipality. It increases trust, it enhances transparency, and also it encourages citizens to organize themselves, for example, lawyers, civil society organizations, technical experts. When going through these accounts and when combing through the data, people are encouraged to organize themselves in order to basically work with a hive mind, to put their brains together to see if everything is right, if everything is okay, and if something is salient, if something feels that it is not, that it shouldn't be there, if there are some numbers don't make any sense, the people can then organize to hold the government accountable. So I think that one of the first steps is certainly to publish public accounts. Another step would certainly be to review the law of public bids and public bidding, and to improve the law in order to increase transparency, in order to make sure that there are no subtleties there, that there are no insider trades, that there's no back dealing, and also in order to ensure that the law opens up as much space as possible for new and emerging companies, especially local companies and national companies, but also perhaps SMEs, in order for them to be eligible for the bid and to be able to launch competitive bids. So this is, at least when it comes to the initial phases, when you have a lot of work that should be done on legislation and on legislative texts. I am certainly a proponent of publishing public accounts and improving public bidding, so in order to increase the number of actors that can bid, but also in order to increase transparency.
Absolutely. And maybe to conclude our sessions today, just to be mindful of the time, what would be next for Syria? So what can we expect in the coming months or years? You know, the geopolitical situation in the Middle East is increasingly volatile with different factors, different elements, conflict around the world, and also, you know, different problem at different spheres of powers. So on a monetary level, on a political level, but also I would call it on a strategic level. So what can we expect next for Syria, and what would be Syria's most strategic move going forward?
Certainly. I do believe that while the situation in the region is very tense, borderline explosive, I would say, we could certainly expect an improvement in the public finances in Syria for two main reasons. One of them that just emerged over the weekend. The first one is, as we've previously discussed, and as colleagues in the Institute have developed upon extensively, is the lifting of international sanctions. This is going to allow for more FDI, for more capital to flow into the country, namely from, as we previously discussed, Turkey, but also the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and the state of Qatar and other perhaps countries that are members of the Arab League. This, we hope, is certainly going to have a positive impact on public finances. This could lead also to a lifting of restrictions on withdrawals from public accounts. The current government imposed restrictions on withdrawals and caps on withdrawals in January of this year. So once there's more money, there's more liquidity in public accounts, we're pretty sure that these limitations are going to be lifted. That means that the average Syrian citizen is going to have more money and they're going to have more money in their pockets, which means that there's going to be this is going to increase the size of the market. And this could also see some people invest in their own businesses, in startups and in SMEs. Of course, we're not talking about anything along the lines of a tech startup, but still, SMEs are drivers of the economy. And even if someone sets up a small grocery shop, this is going to lead to financial turnover, and it is going to lead to growth. So when it comes to this, and despite the very challenging situation in the region, I think that Syria's economy on the micro level and on the local level is not going to be as impacted as, say, the economy of Iraq. But also on the other hand, and this is perhaps a blessing in disguise, the current situation, given an increase in the prices of oil over the past couple of days because of the situation in the region, this will very likely positively impact the public finances in Syria. Syria is heavily dependent and has always been, or I should say, Syria's export sector is heavily dependent and has always been on exporting hydrocarbons, namely oil. Syria, Western Syria isn't very rich in oil, but northeastern Syria, so the area northeast of the Euphrates River, is very rich in oil, and Syria has always been very, very dependent on that region for its own energy needs, but also for exports, namely geared towards Turkey. And so, as a result, right now, with the increase in oil prices, this could have a positive impact on public finances. This could increase the liquidity. This will be better than the forecasts that were put in place by the current governments in Syria. This will lead to extra liquidity. And so as a result, this will give the government of Syria more investment opportunities. It's just that right now we are not sure about where these priorities lie. And so as a result, it is very important to continue monitoring the situation, and for civil society organizations, but also for nonprofits and for private sector actors to continue to advocate with the government of Syria in order to better shape and better mold its investment priorities. But in short, more finances, more capital inflows resulting from an increase in the price of oil will certainly give the government of Syria more elbow room when it comes to not just more investment, but also better investment, better targeted investment.
Absolutely. And what would be the strategic move? So what sectors the Syrian government could invest in, or what kind of efforts it could reorient it to deliver to the Syrian people at the end, and also strengthen regional cooperation?
I mean, in the case of Syria, we're dealing with a fairly classic case of reconstruction, and when you're dealing with a reconstruction, it is highly recommended that the initial drive of investment is geared towards infrastructure. Syria's infrastructure, be it when it comes to transportation or electricity or water or other forms of infrastructure, I mean, this has been completely and utterly destroyed during the civil war. And so as a result, and taking into account that infrastructure is centered on projects, so you have a starting point, you have an end point, you have an allocated budget that you cannot go beyond this budget. You have fairly robust monitoring mechanisms when you have an infrastructure project. In addition to that, in comparison to other forms of investment, it is fairly limited in terms of time, and it yields dividends. Your return on investment is fairly high, and an infrastructure project returns its cost in a fairly small amount of time. In addition to that, infrastructure projects create a lot of job opportunities across the supply chain, all the way from the board to the engineering room to people on the ground working on building the project proper. So initially, at the very least, and say over the first 1 to 2 years, it's highly recommended that the government of Syria invests in infrastructure. As we previously said, the airport in Damascus and the airport in Aleppo are functional. That doesn't mean that they cannot be improved and developed and expanded so that they can serve, for example, as regional hubs for one of the major Gulf carriers. And the major Gulf carriers have always had an interest in the market in Lebanon and Syria as a secondary hub or as a regional hub. So there's that. The main highway that links Damascus with Aleppo via Homs and via Hama, but also to the Syrian coast, is devastated, and so as a result, improving the highway and revamping it is certainly a priority. This is going to increase trade. This is going to increase internal tourism. Even this is also going to encourage some private sector actors that are based in Lebanon to invest more in Syria, because they know that their access would not be hampered. So this is certainly something to look at. But yeah, initially, at the very least, investing in infrastructure is a safe bet. And of course, the private sector, but also civil society organizations and activists and subject matter experts should work with the government of Syria in order to steer and guide its investment in infrastructure.
Absolutely. Abdul Fattah, thank you very much indeed. If we may take 3 takeaways from our conversation, it will be first, strengthen on a micro level the internal capabilities of Syria. So on a civil society level, and also on main political bloc. On the other side, we have the economy. Major investments into the economy needs to be made. Major investment on infrastructure, and also different pipelines of the economy. The second take will be strengthen regional unity. I think that's an important take for the strategic interest of the region and also the strategic interest of Syria. I think maybe, and I think it's important to underline that the future should be done together in unity and peace. And I think that's an important way for having long-term sustainable peace within the Middle East. It should be done internally. So the more we internationalize the problem or the challenges in the Middle East, the longer it will last. I think having micro-level solutions, grassroots solutions are key to resolving some of the most prominent challenges facing the region today. And most importantly, it's all about participation. It's all about transparency and being able to involve different fractions of society. Youth are one of them. They represent a major part of not only Syria, but mainly the whole MEA region. The future is bright, is positive, only if we invest in it. So it needs to be, if we want a bold future, a future of innovation, we need to take ownerships of, well, sure, our positions, but then mainly of knowing where we're going, having a clear plan, a clear vision, and most especially, I have good hopes for the regions and good hopes for the people of the Middle East.
It's always a pleasure being with you, Abdel-illah. Thank you for hosting me today, and looking forward to future discussion with you and other colleagues in the Institute to discuss other regional challenges.
Thank you.